you're around your Christian family who doesn't know that the story of God's S-O-N is actually an anthropomorphized depiction of God's S-U-N.
All right, let's see it.
Appearing to seas moving south during the winter solstice, therefore the sun being so-called dead for 3 days.
So the sun does not seem to hold still in the sky for 3 days, and certainly not the 3 days following the winter solstice. The sun has already started to rise higher in the sky the day after the winter solstice, and I'm unaware of any text from the ancient world, much less from ancient Israel, that actually frames this as the sun being dead for 3 days. But if anyone can point me in the direction of any such text, I would be happy to amend my position. This sounds to me a lot more like an attempt to account for why the Romans traditionally celebrated the winter solstice on the 25th instead of on the 21st or the 22nd, and specifically a way to account for that so that it becomes the explanation for why Jesus was celebrated on that day. But the reality is just that this was the traditional date of the celebration of the winter solstice, because otherwise they're chasing the date. It changes every year depending on what day the solstice falls on, and then because of intercalation it can change as well. So they just picked a day and decided we're just going to celebrate it on this day every year, and that happened to be the 25th of December.
On the southern crux or cross constellation, making it the longest and darkest days of the year.
So we know for a fact that the Southern Cross played absolutely no role whatsoever in the celebration of the winter solstice or in the development of traditions regarding Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. The first reason we know this is that the Southern Cross was not its own constellation anywhere near the time of Jesus. It was considered a part of the constellation Centaurus when it was first identified in the ancient world around 1000 BCE. It would not be distinguished as its own constellation, described as a cross shape, or given any name associated with the word cross until well over 1,000 years after Jesus' death. The other reason we know for a fact it played no role is because it was not visible in the 1st century CE to anyone in the northern hemisphere. It's called the Southern Cross because it's primarily visible in the southern hemisphere. Once you get above about 25 degrees latitude, it's not really visible. And Israel, Rome, Athens, these are all above 25 degrees latitude. However, because of the precession of the equinoxes, it very, very slowly changes its position in the sky. And between about 500 BCE and about 300 or 400 CE, it was not visible at all to anyone in Israel, in Rome, or in Athens. And so it could have played absolutely no role whatsoever in the development of these traditions.
And then Sirius, the star in the east, so-called, on December 24th aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt, the 3 kings, and they all point in the place of the sunrise on December 25th.
So a handful of problems here. Sirius is definitely not the star mentioned in the Nativity story. It had been around for centuries prior to that. And if you'd like a good discussion of the development of attempts to try to identify that star, my friend Aaron Adair, who is a PhD in physics, has a wonderful book out called The Star of Bethlehem that discusses attempts to historicize the Nativity account. Now, additional problems. Sirius is always aligned with the 3 stars in the belt of Orion because the stars are in a fixed position. They don't move in relation to each other, so that never changes. Additionally, there was a time when those 4 stars pointed at the sunrise on December 24th or 25th. The last time that happened was about 3000 BCE, and it won't happen again for about 19,000 more years. Because of the precession of the equinoxes, the position of the stars relative to the sun slowly shifts over time. And so that is not an annual thing. That's something that takes place about every 25,000 years or so. And so that definitely played absolutely no role whatsoever in the development of any tradition associated with Jesus.
AKA the birth of the sun, or Jesus' birth, Mithra, Attis, etc.
So there is no connection whatsoever between December 25th and the births of Mithras, Attis, or Horus. These were not all sun deities, and the closest we get here is the confusion of Mithras with Sol Invictus, who was celebrated on December 25th, starting in the late 3rd century CE, after Christians had already identified December 25th as the birthday of Jesus.
Oh, and how Bethlehem, translating to bread house in Hebrew, is a place in the sky represented by Virgo, which is symbolized by an M carrying a bundle of wheat or bread, personified by the Virgin Mary, Myra, and Maya, and Virgo literally meaning virgin in Latin.
So there is no connection whatsoever between the constellation Virgo, the Virgin Mary, or Bethlehem. The M of the Virgo emoji is based on the translation of Virgo as maiden. Now, it does mean virgin, and it is associated with wheat because it's associated with harvest. But that fact alone establishes absolutely no relationship to the town of Bethlehem, and no such relationship is attested in any ancient text whatsoever.
The ancients were conscious of astrological and astronomical events of the winter solstice and the spring equinox and made stories about them to pass down. It wasn't until the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, where ninjas started to take things too seriously, and literally because of Roman Emperor Constantine I said so.
So the Council of Nicaea has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the date or the nature of the celebration of Jesus' birth. It does have to do with how they determined when they were going to celebrate Easter. One of the things that they discussed was a means of calculating the date that would decouple it from the calculation of the date of the Passover within Judaism. But there's absolutely no other connection whatsoever to any other celebrations within Christianity.
Not to mention, the Bible tells people not to even set up a tree in their home and deck it with silver and gold, like the heathens do.
So the Bible says absolutely no such thing whatsoever. Jeremiah 10 is not about setting up and decorating a tree in one's home. It's about chopping down a tree and then using chisel and tools to craft the wood to turn it into an idol or a divine image. And I go into more detail about this in my video number McClellan 1125.